Well, good morning, and this message is for July 19th, 2020. We've been looking at the book of Jude, and we have seen that there are marks of moles, even though you can't see them. You can see the marks of them, and we've looked at them. And then not the apostle, Jude, he gives um, warnings to these teachers. Now, the teachers don't have adequate fear of the Lord. They should be very concerned about what the Lord will do to them if they teach falsely. I know that when I study the Word of God, it's always in the back of my mind. I have to be accurate. I want to be fair. I want to handle the Scriptures correctly. But these false teachers, they don't really care about that. They don't fear the Lord enough. Even James says, "Be not many teachers, for you shall incur the stricter judgment." And these false teachers, they think that they're fooling someone there, or they're not aware that God has them on the radar. And so Jude gives warning to these false teachers, these underground moles, that they are really on God's radar. And he sees them. If you look at the book of Jude, and it says here in I'll start with verse 4. For certain persons have crept in unnoticed. That's unnoticed to people. Uh, they're unnoticed. Those who were long beforehand marked out for this condemnation. Well, who marked them out for this condemnation? It was God. God sees them. God knows what they're trying to do, and so God has them spotted, and they are long beforehand marked out for condemnation. And as you recall, Judas, who was a traitor, one of the 12, our Lord Jesus Christ knew exactly who he was and had him spotted. And so God is aware of these people, and Jude wanted them to know that God sees what they're doing and they're not going to escape judgment. As a matter of fact, God knows exactly how to divide things and save the ones that believe and persecute or punish the ones who do not believe or are doing the wrong things. And there are a parallel passage that's in 2 Peter to this, and in Jude, he talks about three examples that have to do with how God punishes those who do wrong. And Jude uses the example of Israel, the apple of God's eye, and even though he had saved them out of Egypt and provided for them, there came a time when he said, "I'm tired of you disbelieving, and none of you all are going to go into the promised land except Caleb and Joshua." And he knew exactly how to divide that. Then also he knew um, the angels who had left their first estate and came down here and cohabited with women, and he has put them into the lowest hell, Tartarus, and has them bound for eternity. And then he used the example Jude did of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Sodom and Gomorrah, righteous Lot and his two daughters were taken out and saved, but all the rest did not come out and were lost. But 2 Peter uses the angels as an example again, and he uses Sodom and Gomorrah, and then he talks about Noah. And so Noah, he preached for 120 years, and then in that 120 years, only his immediate family believed, plus their wives, and they were the ones that were saved on the ark, and all the rest were punished and lost. So there are three examples in Jude and three examples in Peter, and they're similar in that there's some overlap, but then one uses one example, the other one does not. So Jude reminds us of three examples of God's judgment, and you false teachers would be well to pay attention and heed and correct your teaching. It says in verse 5, "Now I desire to remind you, though you know all things once for all." So this is something that's familiar with them, something that they've heard about in the scriptures previously, that the Lord, after saving a people out of the land of Egypt, subsequently destroyed those who did not believe. Well, that's example number one. And it says here, it doesn't say here, but it refers to it, what he did for them. And you know that he brought 10 plagues on the nation of Egypt. Pharaoh was particularly stubborn, and God brought it all down with bugs and boils and darkness and hail and frogs and water turned to blood, and finally the angel of death. And it touched every household that was there. And they said, "Get out of here. Here, take gold. Leave." And so the Israelites left, and then God was leading them seemingly aimlessly and made it look like they were dumb because they had pinned themselves up against the sea. And Egypt said, "Oh, look, they're so stupid. We have to go capture them again, and we can." And they went after them with lock, stock, and barrel. They had their chariots, their horses, their armies, and they were coming after the Israelites to capture them again, re-enslave them. God stopped them, opened up the Red Sea, had them go through with it. Then he opened up the barrier that was stopping the Egyptian army. They come in there, and God destroys the entire Egyptian army, all their chariots, all their horses, all their army, and the Israelites didn't have to lift up a sword. And so they see this. They see how God, in his own strength, took care of one of the most powerful nations on the earth at that time and released the Israelites. So they saw the plagues. They walked through the Red Sea. They ate the manna that God put on the ground for them every morning. They drank the water from a rock when they were in the desert. They were at Mount Sinai, and they saw the earthquake and the fire come down from heaven and the trumpeting and the smoke. And they received the 10 Commandments. And they had the pillar of fire there by night and the cloud by day. And yet they could not see how God could defeat the giants of the land of Palestine. And in Numbers chapter 14, the 12 spies come back. Numbers chapter 14. And as they came back, 10 of the spies gave a bad report, and 2 of the spies gave a good report. And this is what we read in verse 30. "Surely you shall not come into the land in which I swore to settle you, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. Your children, however, whom you said would become prey, I will bring them in, and they will know the land which you have rejected. But as for you, your corpses will fall in this wilderness. Your sons shall be shepherds for 40 years in the wilderness, and they will suffer for your unfaithfulness until your corpses lie in the wilderness. According to the number of days which you spied out the land, 40 days for every day you shall bear your guilt. A year, even 40 years, you will know my opposition. I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely this I will do to all of this evil congregation who are gathered together against me in this wilderness. They shall be destroyed, and they will die." So there were those who were unbelieving, and there were those who were believing, and God divided them. And those who believed were saved, and those who were unbelieving were lost. And the children whom they said, oh, they're going to be prey, these are the ones that God preserved and was taking into the land. So God knows how to divide, and he will surely know how to take those who are believing and save them, and take the false teachers and cast them into hell and to punish them. Then there were the angels who left their first estate. And it says here in verse 6 of Jude, and angels who did not keep their own domain, and that was heaven, but abandoned their proper abode, he is kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. And once again, Jude is assuming that you know the Old Testament. And he's assuming that you know about that passage in Genesis chapter 6 that he is talking about, where the sons of God, which is a reference to angels, a word study would lead you to that. There's like 5 references to the sons of God, and 3 or 4 of them are in the book of Job, and it is a reference to angels. And so the sons of God saw the daughters of men and took whom they chose. And there's a disagreement among Christian leaders and teachers as to whether it was the angels who demon-possessed men who then in turn took these women, or whether the angels who appear as men cohabited with them directly. One of the statements is that they say that the angels are unable to procreate because of the statement that Jesus said that angels are neither marry or are given in marriage. And of course, that's true in heaven, but these angels are not in heaven. They have left. And secondly, all angels, as far as I know, are male, so there couldn't be marriage. But at any rate, you can go back and forth on that. But one way or another, the angels, either by demon possession of men or directly cohabiting with the women, took the women and as they chose. And God decided to punish these angels who did not keep their first estate. And he put them into the lowest of hell, called Tartarus. That's the only time that's used in the Bible, by the way. It says here also in verse 7, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they in the same way as these, the angels. So the angels went after strange flesh, as Sodom and Gomorrah went after strange flesh, and these angels therefore are reduced to the lowest Tartarus. Now it bears repeating to look at 2 Peter chapter 2. There's a little bit more information there on the angels, because he uses this example also. As he was warning about false leaders and teachers, he said in verse 4, for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell, and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah. Then he goes on. So he talks about sending them to the darkest place and the judgment. So if God does not spare the angels, he's not going to spare these false teachers, these cultic leaders. He's going to see that they are taken care of, you see. Then also there is the third example given in Jude, and that is on Sodom and Gomorrah. And Sodom and Gomorrah talks about this in verse 7, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they, in the same way as these, indulged in gross immorality. They believed that uh, normal sexual practices didn't excite the gods, but if you did aberrant sexual practices, it would excite the gods, and then they would make the crops abundant and various such things like this. And they would do all kinds of strange things with animals and with the same sex and things like this. And so um, sodomy even is taken from that ancient city of Sodom. So just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they in the same way indulged in gross immorality, not just immorality, gross immorality, and went after strange flesh, and are exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. Now, in this instance, what happened to them was that the entire area became torched with a huge explosion and sulfur and fire and brimstone, and it was a visual thing. And that area to this day is as barren as it possibly can be. You'll recall when Lot and Abraham were having trouble having enough space. Uh, Abraham said to Lot, "Let's not fight among ourselves. We'll divide. You look to your left, and if you see what you like, take that. If you look to your right and you see what you like, take that, and I'll take the other." And it says, evidently they were at a high place in the land when Lot looked over and they saw the valley of the Dead Sea. Of course, it wasn't so dead at the time, and that it was well watered and lush and green. He said, "I'll take this area over here as a grazing place." And so he went down there, and eventually he settled into the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. There are two different cities, but he settled in one of them, and he was vexed the entire time that he was there. Well, what happened was that this 5 cities in the area decided that they weren't going to pay taxes or tribute to their overlords that were over in the modern day um, Iraq area. And so they didn't send tribute anymore. And so the Iraq area got an army and came and they destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. They took everybody there, that included Lot. And as they were taking, this massive army was taking all these people, a smaller army, very, very much smaller army, that was with Abraham, he vowed to honor God if God would give him the victory. And he went after them, and they divided up their forces, and they attacked them from 2 different sides. And this army that had brought down all the cities in that area, this huge, great, hardened army, were surprise attacked, and they ran, and they chased them out as far as Damascus, and stopped chasing them, and they saved all of the prisoners, the enslaved people, including Lot and his family. And so as they were making their way back, they stopped at Salem, which is modern day Jerusalem, and a gentleman came out named Melchizedek. And during that time, as Abraham was keeping his vow that he had made before, and he gave a tithe to Melchizedek, and he gave tribute to the Most High God who gave him victory. And instead of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah saying, this God that Abraham worships gave him a great victory, there was no way that Abraham should have been able to beat this great army, but he did. We want to know more about this God, but that never happened. Nobody seemed to be interested. And so Abraham had witnessed to this entire group of people, pointing them to the God of Abraham and the God of Melchizedek, and they really would have none of it. And so sometime later, the angel of the Lord, which is the pre-incarnate Christ, the second person of the Godhead, and two angels came with him. And they appeared as three men, and they said, well, should we tell Abraham about what we're about to do? And Abraham was hopeful that his witnessing, his effort to save the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, his witnessing and pointing them to Christ, that there would be some result of that. And they said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because their evil has come up to the heights of heaven. And he said, well, would you destroy the righteous with the unrighteous? What if you destroy the city and then some righteous people get destroyed? No, we wouldn't do that. He said, well, what if there's 50 there? Well, we wouldn't do it for 50. How about 40? How about 30? How about 10? And God said, we would not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah if we could find 10 righteous people. And so the angels of heaven, not the second person of the Godhead, but those two angels went down to the city where Lot was, and they were going to stay in the city square that night, and Lot wouldn't let him. He said, please come into my house, because he knew they weren't going to be safe. The people there were so wicked, they wanted to know these men sexually, men knowing men, they would rape them, done all kinds of things. And they could not find 10 righteous people. The whole city was bad and evil. So the following day, they purposed to take Lot, his wife, his two daughters, and their engaged husbands if they'd come, but they wouldn't. And so they eventually had to lead them out and protect them, and then destroy the whole city of Sodom and Gomorrah and some of the other small cities. And thus they showed that God was able to make a division between those who were believing and those who were unbelieving, that he could mark out the unrighteous and mark out the righteous. And he could mark out the unrighteous unbelieving Israelites and the righteous believing Israelites. He could make that demarcation. And so false teachers don't think that you're going to escape, because he is going to nail you. He's even nailed the angels in heaven who have left their first estate. So in summarizing all of this, we see therefore that God can make a differentiation. Now, this also is something that we should understand, that the warning to the false teachers is God's got you marked out, and he knows how to punish you, and you will not escape. Here's something else that everybody should know, and that is that God knows who truly trusts in him and those who do not. And so what we need to do is make sure in our hearts that we truly believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and we will be saved. Just for instance, let's say that an atomic bomb is dropped on New York City. And as the atomic bomb drops on New York City, everybody is obliterated, just completely obliterated. And they're turned into vapor. You know, God can take the ones who are believers and save them, and the ones who are unbelievers are divided apart, and they go to hell. So God is able to make that demarcation. No matter what happens, he can preserve those who love him, and he can punish those who do not.